Can you break it down for people listening what the Pentagon Papers were and how that led into the Watergate burglary and how you got involved in it?
So we went ahead and did the Pentagon Papers case for the New York Times and won the case in the United States Supreme Court and got to publish all 47 volumes. But what happened is I got to read. I was one of the few human beings on the planet that actually read all 47 volumes of this, because we were trying to determine what we were going to publish and what we weren't. We're vetting what we're going to publish.
Why wouldn't you just publish all of it?
Well, because you didn't want to reveal names of people, for example, the thing that Snowden got in all the trouble for, right?
Right.
So the bottom line is I was doing all that, and Bailey had already contacted me earlier before I went to the Cahill firm, wanting me to join his firm. But all he wanted me to do is write legal briefs on behalf of constitutional rights to protect fucking criminals.
Did Bailey have anything to do with the Pentagon Papers?
No.
I would imagine that he would not want that shit published.
No, he did not. He did not have anything to do with it. But he knew that I was doing all that stuff, and he had asked me first to come to his firm.
You're the good guy to recruit.
And so the bottom line is, when he got retained by McCord to defend McCord in June of 1972, June 17th, when the burglary took place, Bailey gets retained because he was on Index 4, along with William Bennett Williams and two other attorneys, that he was on Index 4.
Why do they call it Index 4?
It was just a code name they had for the list.
CIA code name?
Yeah, it's a CIA code name. There were 4 lawyers that were on retainer by the CIA, so that if they got caught engaged in domestic covert operations, which is illegal, that they would call these lawyers, right? And so Bailey was one of them. And so Bailey called me and asked me if I would come out of the Cahill firm and come to his firm to be on the case. So when we got there, I realized that these 3 of these Cubano guys from our interviews with McCord, that they were Trafficante guys. And so I was kind of saying, look, I'm responsible for trying to monitor the hearings that are becoming up, the Watergate hearings.
Who was Trafficante?
Santos Trafficante was the Don of the Mafia in Havana. And in January of 59, when Batista was overthrown by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, et cetera, that Trafficante fled and came to Tampa, actually. Came to Tampa and was here.
Say.
Yeah, oh yeah. And that was Santos Trafficante, the mob boss, for all of Havana, which was a key area because it had the gambling casinos, it had the houses of prostitution, et cetera.
Wasn't Meyer Lansky big shot down there?
Miami. He had Miami National Bank is a Lansky bank. It was a mafia bank.
But he ran a bunch of the casinos and whorehouses down there.
That's right. And they had the main heroin trafficking was coming in from Southeast Asia, coming in through Trafficante, was also partners with Vang Pao and over in Laos. And they were bringing in the heroin into Havana. And the 3-person partnership was Batista, Santos Trafficante, and this guy, Paul Helliwell, for the CIA, are the ones that handled all the heroin coming in through Havana.
From Laos?
From Laos.
Wow.
That's right. Through Vang Pao. Yeah. And so the bottom line is I came into the office and we ended up, participating in getting McCord to blow the whistle on them. He wrote the letter to Judge Sirica, explaining to him who the burglars were and what they were doing, because he thought that they were actually coming in to try to protect. They thought that, the story that he told was that they thought that the Democratic Party was coddling people that were illegally opposing the Vietnam War, which they thought was undermining national security. That's what James McCord was talking about. But the bottom line is, it turns out, we found out through our interview of Trafficante directly that the reason they'd gone into the Watergate Hotel was because Larry O'Brien, who had just been made the new head of the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate Hotel in Washington for 25 years, previously was the chief lobbyist in Washington for Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes is the guy that Richard Nixon contacted to set up the assassination team to kill Castro and Che Guevara. And the bottom line is that's the group that killed the president. And that's what the Watergate burglary was all about. Is Nixon was terrified that they were going to find out that, because Larry O'Brien had worked for Howard Hughes, that Larry O'Brien may have found out that Nixon is the one who created the assassination team that ended up killing the president, and that if that ever got out, that nobody would believe that he wasn't behind killing the president, which he wasn't. But he was behind trying to kill Castro, and it was that same unit that killed the president in '63.
All right, we're gonna have to rewind a little bit, and we're gonna have
that's
to go
off the UFO subject.
We're gonna have to go a little slower over this for a second.
Oh yeah.
So the guys you interviewed, Trafficante, and found out that the Cuban guys were going into the hotel to find. They were hired by who?
They were, well, I'll take it from the top, and I'll tell you, so you'll know the details of it. What happened when I realized that there were Trafficante guys that were in the hotel, and I was saying, what the hell has that got to do with anything? Why are they there? Mm-hmm. So I get a hold of Bill Taylor, who was my investigator assigned to me in the firm of Bailey. And Bailey gets a hold of Bad Andy Tooney, who was the chief investigator for Moriarty and Associates, which is Bailey's investigation firm. Right, and he interviews Trafficante at Hank's house, Henry Gonzalez, at his house here in Tampa. He sets up an interview and interviews him at length, and he explains what's happened here. What happened is back in late May, actually, of 1960. This is the 1960 presidential campaign, and Richard Nixon is the vice president under Eisenhower. Right? And he is campaigning to get the Republican Party nomination in 1960. And in late May of 1960, Nelson Rockefeller withdraws from the campaign in Michigan. And therefore, Nixon knew he was going to win the nomination because Nelson Rockefeller was out of the competition, and Nixon was going to be the nominee. And they were certain they were going to win because there was this kid, Kennedy, that was going to be the nominee for the Democrats. So they were all convinced that he was going to win. What Richard Nixon did, he was the head of the 5412 Committee, which is the subcommittee of the National Security Council that does covert operations under Section 5412 of the National Security Act of 1947 that authorizes the CIA to engage in activities from time to time at the request of the president to protect national security. And so Nixon chaired the 5412 Committee of the National Security Council. So he knew that Howard Hughes was a secret consultant to the National Security Council. He was running special operations. He, for example, had designed and created the Glomar Explorer, which was the special ship that was able to pick up submarines off the bottom of the ocean if a Russian machine. Right. He also did the C-5A cargo plane out of the Summa Corporation, and he was also doing other stuff for the National Security Council, 5412 Committee.
We're talking about Howard Hughes, the guy that Leonardo DiCaprio plays an aviator, right?
This is Howard Hughes, and he's living in Las Vegas, at the one of the major mob hotels, and he's living in the penthouse suites up there, right?
Right.
And so the bottom line is Richard Nixon contacts him as soon as Richard Nixon knew that Nelson Rockefeller had withdrawn and he was going to be the nominee, and he contacted Howard Hughes and on the secret phone for the 5412 Committee, talked with him by phone and asked him to set up an assassination team to kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and 5 of the commandantes that they wanted assassinated. And he said, but you got to keep it completely away from the White House, so that. But if you could get that done, that I would deeply appreciate that when I become president, right?
But if Howard Hughes, why would Howard Hughes set up an assassination team?
Well, when you know the nature of what some of the things were that Howard Hughes was doing with the 5412 Committee, it was the deepest, darkest, most secret stuff that they were doing, and he was part of it. It wouldn't help for me to go into what that one was, but there was an extremely super sensitive program that Howard Hughes was working on with them, in addition to the Glomar Explorer and the C5A and all that. And because of the depth of the darkness of that relationship that he had, he knew that he could go in under that umbrella of that super dark program, and to get Hughes to do this. Hughes doesn't agree or disagree with Nixon on the phone whether he's going to do it or not. He's not dumb. So, but what he did is he got one of his lawyers, Bob Mayhew, and Bob Mayhew he assigned to go get this done, see if they could put this team together. Bob Mayhew meets with Johnny Roselli. Johnny Roselli is the bag man at the Sands Hotel that's owned by the mob. And Johnny Roselli is in Las Vegas, where Howard Hughes is, and where Bob Mayhew was. And so Bob Mayhew gets a hold of Johnny Roselli and says, "Look, you guys, have every reason in the world to try to get rid of Castro. He shut down the whorehouses, he shut down the gambling casinos, and very important, he's cut off the heroin supply that's coming in to the C Supply Corporation." So if you guys would do this, the president would be really grateful. And they started referring to Nixon as the president because everybody assumed he was going to win, right? And so Johnny Roselli says, "Well, look, I'm going to have to go and see Giancana, who's my principal here. I can't do this, so I'd have to clear this through Giancana." So Johnny Roselli goes back to Chicago and meets with Giancana and says, "Look, here's the Nixon who's going to get to be president now. Wants this assassination team put together. Can we do this?" And Giancana says, "Well, that's Trafficante's territory. He's the Don of Havana, and even though he's fled and he's up in Tampa now, he said, we're going to have to go meet with him to see whether he would okay this." And so what they do is they set up a meeting, and Sam Giancana goes, and Johnny Roselli goes, and Bob Mayhew goes, and they meet down at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami with Trafficante. And they hold 2 meetings there to persuade him to do this, to set this thing up. And then Trafficante says to us, he said, "But I didn't fall off the melon wagon." He said, "So I'm gonna check to make sure that this is coming directly from Nixon, not some," as he said, "brain fart, of Giancana or of Howard Hughes or anybody else." Right. I wanted to, and so that the third meeting they send a guy using the nom de guerre of Mr. Ed. And it was Sheffield Edwards. Sheffield Edwards was the chief of security for the Central Intelligence Agency under Eisenhower and Nixon administration. And so he comes to the meeting and gives them the green light to put this assassination team together. So they put the assassination team together, and Trafficante is the guy who's going to put together the team. And Trafficante picks 15 guys that are former shooters for him out of Havana. Okay. But he gets guys who've been recruited by the CIA to participate in a thing called Operation 40, which is a covert operation that they were running guerrilla raids into Cuba, burning bridges and blowing up, burning sugar fields, and doing that stuff that they were doing. That's Operation 40. And they had recruited a whole bunch of former Trafficante guys to participate in that, who had fled from Havana and were up in Tampa and Miami. This was the anti-Castro Miami right-wing hardball, anti-Castro Cuban refugee community. Alpha 66, the 2506 Brigade, that crowd.
Do you know Felix Rodriguez?
I sure do know Felix Rodriguez. I've taken Felix Rodriguez's deposition.
You took his deposition?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about Felix Rodriguez?
Felix Rodriguez is a shooter. He's one of the guys on the team that killed the president. He and Rafael Chichi Quintero.
I'm going to interview him tomorrow.
Oh, well, that's who he is. Felix Rodriguez, he'll know exactly who I am, because he was the number one guy at Ilopango, running the Contra weapon supply operations, along with Rafael Chichi Quintero. He and Rafael Quintero were in the security division at Pemex in Mexico City, where all the assassins hung out in Operation Condor. He's a cold-blooded fucking killer. That's who he is. Yeah, Felix Rodriguez.
So, okay, how did you learn about Felix? Like initially, how did you find out who he was?
Here's what happened: is that here's Trafficante telling us, explaining how they did this, right? So what they did is Trafficante takes 15 of his guys, all of whom had been shooters for him down in Havana, right? Gun guys. And he takes guys that are all been recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency to work in Operation 40, which is running the raids down into Cuba, right? Mm-hmm. And they've got 5 paramilitary bases. They've got one out on Swan Island, one at No Name Key, one of them in the Everglades, and 2 of them at Lake Pontchartrain, one on the southern border and one on the northern border. The northern base at Lake Pontchartrain is where Lee Harvey Oswald was, working, with the guys in New Orleans.
Right.
Okay. And so the bottom line is they put 15 guys on this assassination team. And the way they do it is they're all spread out in these 5 paramilitary operations, right? And what they do is they send private planes around and pick them up individually, and they fly them to Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And they sign them in, and then they all disappear. And they take them down to Oaxaca, Mexico, at Clint Murchison Jr.'s ranch down there, and they have a triangular fire team based down there. And a guy named Carl Jenkins is training them.
What does triangular fire team mean?
They're high-powered rifles. They set up a triangular crossfire to get 3 different angles coming in to shoot and kill a target, a moving target. Okay. And they were trained down there. And they were tasked to kill Castro, and and they were called the S Force, was their code name. Say that to Felix and watch how he responds to that one.
The S Force.
The S Force. That's who they were, and so that they were tasked to try to kill Castro, and what happened is that they were put together, they were assembled. He picked the guys who were also in Operation 40 working with the CIA so that if any of them got caught, the agency would have to move in to protect them because people would think they're the ones that did it. But they weren't. But they did. I mean, it was Nixon that was asking to have it set up, but it was set up by Howard Hughes, and then Trafficante set it up. But he got the go-ahead from Sheffield Edwards, who was chief of security for the CIA under Nixon, right? And so that's how the thing was set up. And lo and behold, it turns out Nixon didn't get elected, and Kennedy got elected. But Kennedy was not briefed on the existence of this group, okay? And what they did is they set up. You're going to love this part. They set up a mechanism for funding them, and what they were doing is they were to fund the triangular fire team base down in Oaxaca at the ranch, at Clint Murchison's ranch. What they did is they skimmed cash off the casinos in Vegas. They would put them into these brand new suitcases, and they'd put them in the trunks of brand new Cadillac automobiles, and they would drive them from Las Vegas through New Orleans, where all the money would be audited, by Marcello's people. Right? And then they'd drive the money all the way to Miami and deposit it into Meyer Lansky's National Bank of Miami. And then what they would do, here it comes, what they would do is they would wire some of that money down to the Banco Internacional down in Mexico City. And there was a lawyer there by the name of Ogario, and they put it into his account. And that's where they wrote the checks from to pay for all the costs for the triangular fire team base. And that was the bank on which the money that was found in Bernard Barker's pocket in the Watergate burglary came directly from that account. And that's where Mark Felt was headed for. Mark Felt was getting set to go down to the bank to find out what the hell the story is with that account when Pat Gray, who had become the new head of the FBI, instead of Mark Felt, freaked out about the fact that he was getting set to go down the next day on the 23rd of June, following the 17th of June break-in, right? So he goes on the 21st of June. Pat Gray goes to the White House to meet with John Dean and says to Dean, we got a problem here. Mark Felt is getting set to go down to Mexico to this bank down there to track the sequentially numbered bills that were in Bernard Barker's pocket, one of the Watergate burglars. And so John Dean goes and tells what's his name, the chief of staff, what was his name, the guy with the crew cut. Anyway, tells him about the fact that Felt's getting set to go down to the bank, and he needs to find out whether that's going to be a problem. And so the what's the guy's name?
We're talking about the Mexico City Bank, right?
Yeah, the Mexico Banco Internacional.
Right.
And so the bottom line is the chief of staff comes in to talk with Richard Nixon in the Oval Office, and he says, "Mr. President," he says, "I think we've got a problem here." And Nixon says, "Well, what is it, John?" Right? And he says, Pat Gray has just come in, has talked with John Dean, and said that this guy Mark Felt is getting set to go down to this bank down in Mexico City to track this money that was in Bernard Barker's pocket. He says, and he wants to know if that's going to cause any trouble. There's a big long delay on the tape, and Nixon says, "Look, you got to go and get a hold of Ehrlichman right away, and you got to go on over to the agency." And you got to sit down. You got to talk to Dick Helms and to Vernon Walters. Both make sure they're in the meeting and tell them both that they've got to contact. They've got to contact the FBI. The agency's got to contact the FBI. Dick Helms is the head of the
right.
Right. You got to contact the FBI and tell them to get the hell out of that part of the investigation. And so the chief of staff, I'm trying to remember his name still, says to him, "Well, wait a second, what am I going to tell him? What am I going to tell him to say to make him get out of there?" He says, "Just tell him if you can't tear off that scab. If you tear off that scab, it's going to reveal an awful lot of things that can't get revealed. So you just tell Dick Helms and Vernon Walters that if they don't get out of that right away, all the Mexico stuff is going to come out about the Bay of Pigs guys." That's what he said. That's the smoking gun conversation that nobody can figure out what it means. Nobody can figure out what it means, but that's exactly what he said. Because as it turns out, the guys in the Watergate Hotel, in addition to the Cubans, were Howard Hughes and Frank Sturgis, as you may recall, along with G. Gordon Liddy. Okay, but it turns out that Frank Sturgis was in control of one of the 5 paramilitary bases on No Name Key, right? Mm-hmm. No, on Swan Island. He was on Swan Island.
Okay.
And the other one in the Everglades was E. Howard Hunt. These were the CIA liaisons to those Cubano groups that were doing the assaults into Cuba. And they were the liaison to the team of people that were put together to be the assassination team, right? And so these
for Castro.
For Castro,
right?
That's right. And so what happened is that it wasn't the Bay of Pigs thing. People keep thinking, "Oh, the CIA must have killed him because the Bay of Pigs, they were so upset." That wasn't it. It was the Cuban Missile Crisis.